Greetings, my boy. How different my library must look in the light of day. I am happy to see you here, my prince. Tell me, what can I do for you? Ah, so your father has sent you to learn more of the wide world of Hyboria. He is a wise king, and you prove yourself a true heir to his legacy by heeding his advice. Knowledge is the surest strength in the world, my boy, and this is most especially true for those who would one day be king. But come, what has Lord Conan ordered you to learn of today? Ah, wild Pictland. The king would have you learn of the western barbarians, I see. I traveled for a time in that vast, untamed place, long ago, in the flower of my youth. The Picts, they are a fierce people from an untamed land. Not too dissimilar from your father's own tribe, the Sumerians, and yet very different. They are important for you to learn of, my boy, for when you ascend to the throne, besides the Nemedians and the land of Koth, it is the Pictish who most often press our border. They are consummate raiders and thieves. They take cattle, slaves, and slaughter without regard to the sanctity of human life. And yet, they are a vibrant people in their way, and their homeland a place of rare, primordial beauty truly set aside from time. But as usual, I get ahead of myself. Walk with me, my prince, and here, carry these volumes. We are to sort them back upon the shelves whilst I educate you. Now, where was I? Yes, the beginning. The beginning. You have heard me mention tales of the Thurian Age before. The day will come when we examine that antediluvian era in more detail. But for now, you remember that it was the age before our own. A time when the world was dominated by a different context, and when the lands and peoples that we know had yet to come to be. The Picts hail from this misty age before recorded history. Indeed, they were some of the only survivors of the terrible cataclysms that brought the Thurian Age to a brutal end. There are records that say that the Pictish Wilderness was once a chain of tropical isles, but that they were heaved up out of the sea as the Thurian continent entered its death throes, creating a range of hills that dominate the western coastline of Hyboria. The eastern end of Pictland is bordered by the Black and Thunder rivers. The land between these two stretches of water is some of the most fertile land in all of the region, and it sits right on our own western border. But we will discuss it more in just a bit. The Pictish Wilderness is truly an untamed land, covered in dense, deciduous forest that stretches all the way to the shores of the ocean in the west. Not only this, but Pictland is home to remnants of the last age, terrible beasts which survive nowhere else. There are giant elks, enormous lizards with swords that protrude from their tails, saber-toothed tigers, ape-men, giant pythons, and much more prowling beneath the eaves of the Pictish forest. It is said that a man can walk from Zingara to Vanaheim and never once see the sun. The Picts are almost as much a part of this forest as the dangerous creatures that call it home. They move through the undergrowth with barely a sound, nigh invisible unless they wish to be seen. And they are no less dangerous than the animals. The Picts are fierce warriors with a culture based around the exercise of strength. They live in individual tribes gathered around small villages built of crude huts. There are no major cities of stone in all of Pictland, and the Picts fight hard to ensure this remains the case. They go naked almost always, and prefer to use the thrown spear, stone hatchets, and sharp knives knapped from flint. The Pictish do not mine ore, nor do they create armor and metal weapons, and we should be thankful that this is so. Terrible would be the wrath of a Pictish raiding party armed with modern steel. Tribes coalesce around and are named for specific animal totems. Thus, you will find tribal names like Panther, Sabertooth, Crow, and Wolf in the Pictish Wilderness. These animal totems are emblematic of the strength of the tribe and represent the individual's spiritual connection back to the land of their birth. The Picts revere strength, you see. Their tribes are almost always led by the strongest warrior with the aid of a spiritual shaman who can call upon the animal spirits. And these tribal chieftains, necessarily, are almost always very young. Only the strongest may rule among the Picts, and they have no respect as a people for those who cannot care for themselves. This means that the elderly are often abandoned to the predations of the wilderness if they do not wander off on their own to die before becoming a drain on their tribe. Pictish fighters have a strong warrior ethos, and every male within a tribe is expected to partake in raids. However, they do not define what a warrior is in the same way that we do. They have no sense of honor, as we would call it, or chivalry as we know it. Indeed, a Pict will take no issue with slitting your throat while you are asleep, finding equal merit between the knife in the back and the gallant sword drawn in open battle. Their predilection for subterfuge does not mean that they will not seek conflict, merely that they will only engage in conflict that is suited to their tastes. Raiding parties are a way of life among the Pictish. They raid one another, but also push across the border to pillage in Zingara, Vanaheim, and even our own fair Aquilonia. The hardy Bosonians, the inhabitants of the western border provinces, are all too familiar with the burning Pictish brands. Pictish warriors will mutilate the corpses of their fallen foes. They take the heads of their enemies back to hang within their huts, and they believe that these grisly trophies bind the fallen soul to serve the conqueror forever in the afterlife. Most accomplished Pictish fighters have whole shelves of shrunken, shriveled heads adorning the inside of their primitive huts. I cannot say whether or not this binding magic has its root in the real world, but I have seen enough in my travels to know the faithful of Mitra must guard their hearts and their spirits when abroad in the world, lest both be torn asunder by the eldritch claws of Jebel Sag. What is that, my prince? Ah, yes. I get ahead of myself again. Jebel Sag. Jebel Sag is an ancient and primordial deity, one of the true old gods who existed before mankind was even an inkling. He is the wild places, the fearsome beasts, the savagery of tooth and fang and claw. He is the hunter who stalks civilized men, the rending savagery that rules over the animal kingdom. He is a dark god who cares for nothing other than the satisfaction of his own primordial desires. All other animal totems answer to Jebel Sag, and he rules over them like a creator. He is instinct, he is nature, and all animal life is somehow tied back to his precocious whim. Yes, even human beings, before we broke free under the light of Mitra and other lords of order. The Picts maintain a tradition that says that once, long ago, all living things, including the birds and the beasts, spoke the same language. This beast tongue was sacred, but man grew apart from the natural world. We forgot the old tongue and shaped nature to our own whim. Now, it is said, only the oldest creatures touched by the blood of Jebel Sag remember the first language. Powerful Pictish shamans claim to have the power to control animals using this forgotten strain of speech, and some whisper that Jebel Sag himself still comes to the most remote, wildest places to mate with living things to create offspring. A dark god, lording over a dark pantheon, which in turn rules over a wild people, my prince. I see the look upon your face, Prince Cronn. Yes, the ways of the Pict are savage beyond decency, but I urge you to remember, there are as many ways of life in the world as there are grains of sand on the beach, or stars in the sky. Yes, the Picts live a life of brutal, short barbarism, and to us, this can seem horrifying, even criminal. But from the Pictish point of view, their way of life is as natural as the lion's hunt for the gazelle, or the slow turn of decay on the fallen tree trunks of their forest. It is important that you not spurn the culture of others, no matter how low and primitive they may seem. Righteousness always rests in the eye of the beholder, and you must come to accept this fact of life if you are to rule well as king. Yes, my prince, even when it comes to a people like the Picts. Do you remember our lesson on the Hyperboreans? How surprised you were to learn how vital they are when it comes to the complex calculus that is the welfare of our nation. So too it is with the Picts. Your father has continued policies of expansion into Pictland, which has seen Aquilonian colonists flooding over the Thunder River in droves. They have built many settlements between the Black and Thunder River, mostly of Bossonian stock. They farm the fertile land there, but also fight nearly daily against fierce Pictish raiders pouring out of the dark forest covering the hills to the west. The two great military concerns of your father's reign, at least for the last several years, have been the Dragon of Nemedia in the east and the lawless Pict in the west. Fully 1/10 of our armed forces are deployed along the Bossonian marches in order to keep the Picts at bay. And yet, what is there to be done, my prince? The Hyperboreans at least may be outmaneuvered through diplomacy, or their forces shattered by combined force of arms. But the Picts care nothing for diplomacy, and they do not fight in massed armies where one great defeat can cripple them. Your father has hunted the Pictish within their own homeland and lived to tell. He knows how difficult it can be to combat against them. It was a time, many years ago, when old King Numidides first began to push systematic colonization of the marches between the Thunder and Black Rivers. Fort Velitrium had been constructed to defend the region, and the Picts had taken it as a challenge. They raided all up and down the Black River, harrying settlers and slaughtering caravans on a whim. Enter your father, our good King Conan. He wandered where he willed in his youth, chasing adventure and the flow of coin, and so he found himself along the marches, having taken a contract to hunt Pictish raiders along the Black River. In the course of his duties, he found himself wrapped up in a fiendish invasion plot driven by the scions of Jebel Sag. Your father was forced to contend with wild, eldritch beasts, fiendish Picts, and more in order to survive the dark forests of the wilderness. You should ask him to regale you with the tale sometime, my boy. It stands as one of his proudest adventures. But I digress. What is to be done about the Picts, my prince? If they cannot be conquered, if they cannot be bought or allied with, then how are we to contend with them? Are we to simply endure them like a great stag must endure mosquitoes in the height of summer? If I may be so bold, my prince, I believe the way forward is not through contention with the Pictish, but through the empowerment of our own people. Your father has seen this wisdom, and that is why he continues to support the Bosonian settlers who fight daily to tame the wild lands of the marches. I urge you to continue these policies, my boy. The Picts are a people of the wild, as much a part of the untamed land as a symptom of it. Give our people the means to survive. Help them to drive back the edge of the wilderness with the shining light of Mitra's civilization, and you will see the Picts diminish as the wild places diminish. But we have lost track of time. I must take my leave, my prince. I am due to meet with several Shemite scholars fresh up from the far south. Perhaps we can continue this conversation another day. It was good to speak with you, as ever, my boy. Finish putting these books back for me, will you? There's a good lad.